Yes, I'm just gonna quickly say a few words about the art world, and then Vassily will talk about how it relates to Rancière, perhaps. So I think the text, especially the first part, I don't know if that was intended, but one of the very um, one of the things that immediately come to mind when one reads it is this sort of a wink to Adorno and Horkheimer, the dialectic of enlightenment, because this first part could be actually, I think, titled "The Dialectic of Romanticism," because it really talks about like the ambivalent legacy of the Romantic tradition as it is embodied in the contemporary art world, which is at the same time very exclusionary and exclusive, and sort of very tightly connected to the art market and to the finance capital, and is based on a very elaborate structure of on layers of exclusion, let's say, on degrees of access, in a similar way as Nika and David described the queue on the Venice Biennale. But so at the same time, in terms of like its content or its sort of half hidden promise, it's the very it's the most sort of egalitarian democratic institution, um, because of the and having a lot of emancipatory potential, precisely because of its sort of defined forms of its constant sort of challenge to the established aesthetic tradition, and because of its self-reflexive critical apparatus that is sort of built into the art process. And so both these like emancipatory and exclusionary tendencies go back to Romanticism and to Novalis. And I think the text sort of describes this and traces this legacy beautifully. Um, so basically, that within the Romantic thought, you have the idea that there is something like a popular genius, that everyone is an artist innately, even though this sort of artistic ability is somehow distributed. It's sort of across a certain population is um, it sort of reveals itself in collective creativity, let's say. And then but on the other hand, the same tradition also gives rise to this notion of an individual genius, of a person that is possessed by some kind of desire or to express, and so the masterpieces just come out of one's mind. So it's very individualistic and very sort of elitist notion of creativity and of creative genius, of creative capacity, is also there. And so there's a kind of ambivalence, and this ambivalence then is sort of getting replayed, rearticulated in the current contemporary art world. And yeah, so like one of the things, one of the problems this text addresses is sort of what should what has to be done about this, um, because contemporary art, the art world is central to the entire, sort of defines the aesthetic value in our culture, and there is an sort of inherent problem in the way it operates, in how it tends to artificially create scarcity, right? Because talent is everywhere, materials are cheap, so everyone could actually be an artist. But in order to prevent this, the art world acts in a way as if talent is scarce, and so sort of constantly tries to switch from the popular sort of romantic ideal to the elitist romantic ideal. And I think what is very important in this text is that it doesn't just trace the intellectual history of this, but also tries to relate it to the political economy, sort of that underpins the art world. And I think it's really interesting. It's not there's no coincidence in the fact that many like fancy financiers, like venture capital people, also tend to be great art collectors, and so they have a passion for art. So that's I think the text really maps this as a kind of problematic. And I would stop here because I think that would be an introduction. And Vassily,
perhaps a follow-up on this idea that it says something about political economy, because it's kind of our specialty. But so maybe coming back to the definition of production for David, because I think it's a little idiosyncratic, because in fact he comes from Terence Turner, who was his professor at Chicago. And Turner notes that the conventional Marxist models do not quite work when applied to other societies, such as the Kayapo society of central Brazil, which he dealt with like for the most part. And it is because Turner says when you say production, you tend to think immediately of the production of objects, but that shouldn't be so obvious. So Turner describes the Kayapo society as one where social production, that is the creation of people and social relations, is seen as something more important than the production of material wealth. And this is what David refers to as human economies elsewhere. So this definition was initially meant to talk about traditional societies, but you can also apply it to our own societies, to the domestic sphere, for example, where the social production is essentially done by women, or to what David called the caring class, which has become more and more significant in our societies. What's important, I think, is that material, what you can call material economy, or and the human economy can coexist at the same time, just like what he calls the basic communism and the logic of reciprocity or of the market can coexist at the same time. It's simply a question of one having priority over the other. I think it's a very important idea in David's work. Now, the question is, why do Turner and David wants to salvage Marx's notion of production in the first place? And I think it's because for Marx, and in particular for the young Marx, labor is not only about pain, as it is in Adam Smith's work, for example, but it's also a means through which human beings can realize themselves. So there is not on the one hand the artists and on the other hand the workers, which is an idea that Marx, the young Marx, borrows from the German idealism, and in particular from Schelling, which is something that Denis pointed out in our last discussion, referring to Jacques Rancière as well, who says kind of the same thing. So it was, and this idea was also, the initial program of the Russian avant-garde in the 20s, to abolish art as a separate activity and to put it back to work. So I think this is a very important idea that, and again, this notion of production is something that David touched on in many places of his work.
Yeah, I think one of the important ideas of David was the replacement of production and consumptions with freedom and care. And when we talked about like the ideal art world, is the art world that actually not concentrate on production, preservation, and consumption of value system that created by this hierarchical structure that art world it is, but to create a space for everybody who will operate on a notion of abundance that is opposite of scarcity. So that's why in this article we write about artificial scarcity. It's so funny in the art world, because when people discuss like material production, they may say, oh, the oil is limited, like, you know, the food are limited, the land are limited, and so on and so forth, you know. And then in the art world, you cannot do that because that will be like real obvious trick. It's just like a lie. It's plenty of everything, but we artificially design the system in which there is not enough, and then we recreate the same structures as exist in the other part of our society. So in this case, art world is like a great field to experiment. So if we will be able to design here the system that will be like, you know, another art world, art communism, then maybe we can figure out that there is actually enough food for everybody, and we just specifically design the system in which we need hungry people in order to be very few who is fed well, and so on and so forth. So this text actually has much more implication than, yeah, of course, in the beginning we were saying we are not interested in critiquing art world because basically nobody cares about that. It's so small amount of people who is part of this world in any case. But Vassily, I would like,
it really depends on what you call the art world, isn't it? Because you actually say the opposite at some point in the paper, where you say so why do we care so much about the art world? Why at the same time we reject it, and at the same time, you know, it has this subversive force in it?
Yeah, because the art world is not it's not about aesthetic value only, but it's actually like a representation of everything that's going on in our society around. So it's like museums are contemporary churches. So if we can design a new church and show how it's work, then very possible that the rest of the world will also kind of be changed. And so in this text, and in the first chapter, and then in the next chapters more and more, we are describing this Russian avant-garde ideas in one of these institutions called Prolet Cult. And 2 days ago in our assembly, we had a guest that was invited by or recommended by Mitya, Zinaida Vassilieva, who is a researcher of Russian do-it-yourself terminology that also calls самодеятельность in Russian and has a lot of political implications.
So I mean, I had a question I didn't ask, but I have just a very general question, which also relates to one of the parts of the art world text, because at some point you claim that, well, yeah, like look at the Soviet Union, late socialism, where you have a very elaborate network of institutions and organizations in which people who, like, you know, didn't work that hard anyway could spend their free time and like learn, you know, music or painting or you know, excel at math. So basically where people could cultivate themselves like after work or after school for kids. So like an entire like structure of network of organizations where you know, kids could learn about culture and learn to basically nurture their creative skills. So this sort of entire thing was largely subsidized. Well, it was entirely subsidized by the state, and so basically the point, this point which you make in the text, it also resonates with a lot of like scholarship on the Soviet Union, late socialism, in which people are basically saying that, you know, there were certain spaces within the Soviet state where people could, you know, where people were actually free to pursue any kind of creative activity they wanted. And the question is then, you know, is it necessary for these enclaves of something like art communism to exist within the larger structure that is repressive. And so if we go back to the self-activity, самодеятельность, the concept really, so I mean, Zinaida Vassilieva is obviously more qualified to talk about that, but to my ears, it sounds like, it speaks to these notions in the European social theory about some kind of pre-social state, like some kind of spontaneity that comes before any like social structure, any institutions, any rules. And so it looks like then that it's like sort of works the other way around, because this spontaneity only becomes possible within certain enclaves within a larger institutional structure. So it's not that it's pre-social, and if you sort of remove structures, people become creative, but it somehow works the sort of the other way around. People can sort of get creative only by virtue of being embedded in some kind of larger and possibly repressive structure. So I'm not sure if that was clear enough, but my question is whether this is whether it's necessary. And I'm also thinking about one of davidgraeber's texts, and so it's about these subject-object reversals that happen in magic, in fetishism, and also in art, and other kinds of activity where people are genuinely creative. And so an artist who sort of reporting on his or her work says that it's not me, it's the thing itself sort of leads my my paintbrush or whatever. And so at the end of this essay, he sort of talks about whether it's really possible to have a non-alienated consciousness in which everything will be the result of my spontaneous activity. And given that such a situation will apparently contradict the way most artists or scientists describe what they do, and what they do is something we consider to be genuinely creative. And in these kinds of activity, there is this subject-object reversal, and people tend to describe what they do in terms of them being led by something else rather than vice versa. And so the question is whether we would really want such a non-alienated consciousness, completely spontaneous. Okay, so there is a tension between spontaneity and structure, and subject-object reversals and all that. So my question is, whether it's possible to have art communism sort of to be based on, somehow in some alternative way, rather than having it as a network of enclaves within a larger repressive structure.
Yeah, the answer is yes, you can. Because as we know from history, prolet cult was very successful until for a number of years. Yes, it was government finance, but it was decentralized, and nobody from the center was given direct request or demands to the local prolet cult cells or nodes. So, for example, we know that in some provincial Russian towns, it was hundreds of theaters who was doing whatever. Suddenly, it was a burst of creativity. Everybody wanted to do everything, paint, be creative. Yeah. And then it was a political decision when Bogdanov also was removed from prolet cult, and in general, the end of the liberational time in Soviet Union. And then they centralize everything and instrumentalize the activity of the people. So the structure was before, it was working. They didn't start to spend more money. They didn't it was just the same structure. The only thing that was changed is ideology. So after the reorganization, they started to basically use all this amazing amount of thousands of people, and we know that prolet cult has more members, I think, much more members than Communist Party or Bolshevik parties in the early 20s. So they were like, basically the creative movements was much wider and popular than the political movement took over the power. But then the political movement took over the creative one, and they used as volunteer propaganda workers. So they started to send all these theaters rules. So you only can, like, you know, have a theater if you do this and that. If you like, I don't know, praise the Soviet heroes who is increase the production. If you put like, I don't know, poetry about how like Lenin party is perfect, and so on and so forth. So they introduce censorship, instrumentalize people, kind of suppress creativity, and that's correlate with like physical repressions. And it's not only in prolet cult. It's very interesting that Zinaida Vassilieva, she didn't talk about prolet cult. She talked about general general situation with do-it-yourself in Soviet Union. And it's very complex what had happens there. But the bottom line, I don't know about. So maybe you should talk more, or we should talk specifically about object and subject, and you know, spontaneously versus organization. But in this particular situation, in the beginning of the 20th century, after Russian Revolution, this move was clearly suppressive, and the structure was there before. They just replace it with another structure. And coming back to the beginning of your question about the basically unconditional minimal income that existed, or even, let's say, unconditional minimal services that did exist in Soviet Union in the 70s, when the people would go to this you know, low paid but very lazy jobs in all this Soviet scientific research institute, like my parents were. So yeah, so this part of the article I wrote from my own biography, basically. And I would say that I know that my mom would sit in the work, and she would just, you know, have plenty of time to talk, to read, to go to the lectures, to listen to the music. You know, she was a radio engineer. And in this case, what we are trying to kind of advocate now in West with this additional minimal income, and everybody have like a 4 days working day, 4 weeks working day. In Soviet Union, they already have it, or even less than 4 days. I think maybe they work 1 day a week or less in most of the, you know, at least big cities. So probably I was a part of the privileged class in Soviet Union. But that system also was working, and it was a political choice to do that. And then it was a political choice also to reverse that.
What I'm saying is basically that it's very hard to have art communism without communism per se. I mean, without sort of communism that, and any communism will necessarily be also art communism. I mean, it's that there's an inherent limit as to how much the art world could be reformed until, you know, the political economy that underpins it gets reformed or, you know, changed.
Yeah, but exactly the whole text is about, it's not two separate things. It's not like, you know, the political economy and this is an art world. The whole text is about we have the picture of the world that is like that, you know, it's like a picture of the scarcity. And this is it's a wrong picture. This is not what's really going on. So if we will be able to change the way how we operate, we will simultaneously change it in the art world and in, like, you know, whatever political economy it is. So it's not a separate questions. I wanted to ask Vassily about Rancière.
Yeah, there are definitely similarities between this essay and Rancière's writing, and in particular, what you know. So what we said about this notion of production is something, you know, this is kind of pulling the same strings I was saying last time. You know, from Schiller to the avant-garde, the Russian avant-garde, to now the Situationists and so on. Another similarities might be that, you know, what you say about the Biennale, that it only really made sense if exclusion was itself one of the main objects being produced. This is obviously reminiscent of Rancière's notion of the distribution of the sensible. We say partage of the sensible in French, with this idea that it is both shared but also divided. So the distribution of the sensible refers to forms of exclusion and inclusion. So for Rancière, it's first and foremost a political issue. It's not about, you know, how I see, or, you know, it's not about my senses about a particular artwork. It's a political issue. Like women, for example, had been excluded from a communal life simply because they were obviously or visibly not there. They belong to another sphere of domestic labor and reproduction. So this is what he actually means by that, and it is kind of the, you know, you can obviously see similarities with what I've just said about, you know, the notion of production. There are also differences, I think. You know, when Rancière uses the concept of emancipation, when he refers to the desire of being part of the same world, this is what he says in the Knights of Labor. He says the workers, contrary to what they were expected to do, that is to create popular songs, they really like to compose Alexandrine poems. This might be a difference because in new text you seem to assume, but I might be completely wrong, that working class people only want to be soap opera singers or hip hop producers, but maybe they want to be a contemporary artist, which is something that I find a bit problematic. And then there are many other differences because basically the way Rancière defines the police, politics, and so on is completely different than David's definitions.
Oh, really? How is so?
Well, as the police, if we take the example of the police, for David, it is very much linked to a larger social order, and he says, you know, police officers are basically bureaucrats with their weapons. Rancière is saying something similar, but it's like, it's the social order, basically. Police is like the social order that will define and will organize the roles and identities in a specific time and space. The politics is kind of the opposite of that, where you have some sort of a burst of you know, there are moments basically when the politics will emerge and will reshuffle those roles and identities. For David, if you look at what he, you know, the way he uses this term, politics, is kind of different. It's it refers to texts, this text about performativity he wrote, but also you find that in the anthropology of value. Politics is basically the realm of representation. This is, everything is up to grasp in this arena, and you have to negotiate your way through it. And he talks about, he makes a parallel between politics and magic. So you can see that, you know, they don't exactly have the same you know, notions, the conceptions of the police, of politics, but also, you know, while David would talk about freedom, maybe Rancière will talk about emancipation or equality. I have a sense that when David says we should act as if we're already free, Rancière would say exactly the same thing, but he would be saying as if we were already equal. We had equal capacities, basically. This is what he called democracy, and I think they both, and this is another similarity is that they both wrote an amazing book about democracy.
Yeah, and in this case, for example, if you talk about imaginary politics, and that's why I suggest to read a book about pirates, because pirates, as we know, like they were outlaws and violent and so on, and basically criminals. But the major things they did, they were inventors of the story, so they were very active because they actually was a suppressed minority who, like, you know, didn't have long lives. The major weapon was the storytelling, and so they like really created all this like. Started from them, you know, myths and kind of ghost stories that, you know, the ship will kill you because it's like a ghost ship or whatever else, to this lies about the Republic of Pirates that the Peter the Great, Russian Tsar, went to almost make a diplomatic relationship, although the kingdoms didn't exist. So that's, for me, an example of this imaginary politics that is not bureaucrats with the guns. So it's a kind of two type of politics. And so what my question would be about Rancière, where is his politics? Because I know that David was talking about two different type of politics. One is where like it's back up with the bureaucrats with the gun, that is a police police politics. In another is this imaginary realm where everything for grab because you can convince people otherwise.
Essentially, what he says is that it's intermittent, and it arises whenever it can be actually like it's not something that is an unusual phenomenon. It can happen like very very frequently. It is when it's basically when the police is challenged, when the normal distribution of roles and identities in a specific society are challenged.
But before that, what is policies? What is police?
But the police is when, it's when you are in a situation where the roles and identities are organized. Are they supposed to be organized? So basically, something that belongs to the police is, for example, when you go to the Biennale and you see this boat in this pavilion, it is going to say something political, but we're kind of expecting this. So that's the normal order of things, basically. This had to happen. It is political, but it's not necessarily politics, for Rancière, because you were kind of expecting that. It was good, it is the normal order of things.
It would be an interesting question whether Rancière's distinction between politics and the police or policing could be mapped precisely on some of, like, if there is some kind of something directly equivalent in David Graeber's oeuvre. But there's certainly a productive tension between these two visions of politics, because I mean, it would be interesting, like, project to extract some kind of political theory, an explicit political theory from Graeber. But that must be, I mean, we obviously are in no position to do that here, but we could probably in the reading group pursue this as well.